Oh, hello. Now we are going to go over the vertebral column. We're going to start with cervical. So there are 7 cervical vertebrae. There is atlas, then axis, then C1 through 5. Yeah, it's 5. Or C1, C2 through 7. 3 through 7. Sorry. Come on. C6. Okay. Now, looking at the vertebrae, they all have similar structures. So we will isolate C2 and take a look. Now there are different parts to each vertebrae. You can see the transverse process. I'm going to highlight that real quick. Transverse process is what creates this little hole or frame in here. It's just the lateral projection from each side. So if this is the anterior view, go to superior, the transverse process stick out here. Next we'll look at the transverse foramen, which is the hole that the transverse process creates. Then the spinous process. Ooh, I saw it somewhere. There we go. So the spinous process is just this little notch that sticks out here. So C2 through 6 have this little notch here called bifid. C7 doesn't have that. No. Then we have the vertebral foramen right here where the spinal cord goes. See if we can highlight it. Yep. The lamina. Lamina is just this kind of the lateral sides of the vertebral foramen. So there's the spinous process that creates the posterior portion, and then we have the lamina or lamina arcus that creates the lateral portions. Then we can see that the the body here, the body of the vertebrae creates the anterior portion. That helps it all. Okay, the pedicle is this little portion between the body and the transverse process. So if you remember, the transverse process is right here. The body's here. And the pedicle is just the area in between those. Here we have the superior articular process, which holds the superior articular facet. The facet articulates with the vertebrae below it. Above it. The inferior articular facet articulates with the vertebrae below it. So this one's a little different just because that was axis. So you can see that it has this little notch here. Oh, parts. Where are you, parts? The dens of axis. It's this little peg that sticks, this little process that sticks up. It articulates with atlas, and it has articular cartilage here to reduce the friction between the two when they do articulate. If you see here, C3 doesn't have that. C3 just has a place where axis will sit. Atlas is also different. And we'll go parts again. So it has this interior arch that forms the interior portion of the vertebral foramen. This articulates with the occipital bone in the magnum foramen and the occipital condyle. So we remember back in the other video around the inferior portion of the occipital bone, we had that occipital condyle, the articular cartilage. That's what this is articulating with. And this is where the spinal cord comes up through the magnum foramen to attach to the brainstem. Here we have the lateral mass. Lateral makes up the lateral portion of the foramen. Then we have the posterior arch, however you say that. I like posterior. Everybody gets mad at me for that. Anyway, we have the posterior tubercle. And just forms the posterior portion. Here we have the transverse process for atlas. Remember the transverse process for axis in the other cervical vertebrae. This one's just a little bit smaller and has a little bit more of an edge pointing out. Okay. Inferior to the cervical vertebrae, we have the thoracic vertebrae. The thoracic vertebrae are different in the fact that you see this little articular cartilage here. That's where the ribs articulate with the spinal column, or with their specific vertebrae. So here we would have the first rib articulating. It does look a lot different. They change shape as you go down, but we still have this vertebral foramen, and we still have this transverse process. Again, we have the spinous process. We have the superior articular process. Again, that's just where it articulates with the vertebrae above it. The transverse process, you can see here that instead of having a foramen, it's just sticking out and it has articular cartilage. Again, to articulate with the ribs. This is just the body. So we have the body, transverse process, the spinous process, the superior articular process, and we have, dang it, the lamina again. Down here is the inferior articular process. So that's where it would articulate with the vertebrae below it. And going down to the lumbar, I mentioned there are 12 thoracic. Well, I did now. The first lumbar vertebrae. There are 5 lumbar vertebrae. Again, these look a little different, but they don't change much from what they were in the thoracic. So here we have the inferior articular process where it'll articulate with the vertebrae below it. We have the superior articular process where it'll articulate with the vertebrae above it. Then we have the transverse process here, which doesn't have articular cartilage this time. Here we have the spinous process, just like we did before, and the lamina, and then the body. Pretty similar. It's just shaped a little differently, and that's it. Now, as we go further down, they do change shape again. When we look at L5, it sticks out a little more. You can tell that the transverse process and the inferior articular process is just shaped a little differently. Then we have the superior articular process that's they're just angled in a little different way. The spinous process, the body, that's pretty much all the same. We still have the vertebral foramen. Below the lumbar vertebrae is the sacrum, the fused vertebrae here. Now, the sacrum is made of 5 fused vertebrae and shapes the posterior wall of the pelvis. We'll go over the parts. Just one second. The sacral hiatus. Huh, doesn't look like anything's highlighted there. Okay, well here's the median part of the sacrum. It's pretty simple. It's just the middle part, median, middle. We have the lateral part of the sacrum. There's a right and a left. You have the anterior sacral foramen and the posterior sacral foramen. The sacral canal, which again is just with a vertebral column. It's an extension of the vertebral foramen. Just can't figure this one out. Huh. Is it? No. Sacral hiatus forms due to failure of fusion. Yeah. Well, if anybody knows what that is, feel free to teach me. On the sacrum, you can see that we have articular cartilage here because it articulates with the pelvis, or the other bones of the pelvis. And below that we have the coccyx. The coccyx people usually call it the tailbone. But it's an attachment site for muscles, tendons, and ligaments. Nothing really too special about that. All right. And there you have it. That is the vertebral column. If I mess something up, forgive me. Still a newbie. And next we will be doing the thoracic cage.